Stardate 97881.2. Welcome to Star Trek Discovery Pod, the number one podcast where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. My
Aw.
name's Mike Moody. With me is.
Mariah Gossett.
Grant Davis.
Clyde Haynes.
Tonight we are live on YouTube to discuss a storied movie in the Star Trek franchise. Many say it's the best Star Trek movie ever made. Maybe we agree with them, maybe we don't. We'll find out as we review and break down Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Con.
Before we get into it, I do want to acknowledge that we are all suffering due to the ongoing pandemic, suffering in shared ways, suffering in unique ways as well. That's why we're here, all podcasting from our homes. We truly want to wish everyone the best during this time. We hope that you're staying safe and staying healthy, and we are so glad you're listening or watching live. We're just here to give you some fun, nerdy entertainment, all centered around the great Trek universe. So we hope you have fun with us on this episode. And yeah, if you're watching us live on YouTube and you want to ask a question or you want us to read your comment later in the show, just tag us. Just tag us in your comment at Star Trek Pod or type in the word pod in all caps before your comment.
Yeah, and as we are tonight doing Star Trek 2, we're also going to do 3 and 4, 4 being my favorite. So you need to join us on Patreon if you want to hear 3 and 4. Also, in the meantime, Mike and I have been covering the best of 7, going over some of our favorite 7 of 9 episodes from Voyager. So you definitely want to join us there. That's Star Trek on Patreon. So patreon.com/Star Trek Pod. And make sure you join us on Slack and Patreon. It's a good time.
And there's also a few ways you can help us out beyond Patreon. Go and give us a 5-star rating, give us a little review on Apple Podcasts. That is an excellent way to help us out. If you could write a couple sentences, I think that's even better. It's a little special for us. You can also write gibberish, I guess, down there. But write something and give us that 5-star rating. Don't give us 4. Don't give us 3. Definitely don't give us 2. Definitely not 1. 5 stars. And then, yeah, of course, patreon.com/Star Trek Pod. Go there to make your per episode pledge and help support us.
And for those of you listening to the podcast version, not watching the live video, everybody on the left side of my screen
Looks
collaborated.
amazing.
Did you call each other and say we're going to dress up?
Hey, what you
Hey.
wearing? Conwig.
I just had this thing sitting around and figured, you might as well try and
Where
pull
did
off
you-
some con.
Where did you get that insignia that he wears? That is
That's-
Oh,
that is
awesome,
dope.
Mariah.
This is made out
That
of
is dope, Mariah.
construction paper. My spouse made
okay.
it for me, and then this is probably a necklace from like Forever 21.
That is
That looks
awesome.
pretty good.
That's good
And-
work. That's good work.
And Grant, I know that's just what you wear on.
This was
On
just
Easter.
what I wore.
It's a
My
Sunday
wife
night
has a
special.
brown scarf. And I was like, I have a costume. That guy doesn't wear anything.
That's awesome.
It's true. I couldn't go full con without us getting booted off of YouTube. So
Right,
you know,
right.
for the
Yeah.
censors, I'm just
I got the
wearing a yellow
moves here.
shirt.
Out. Yeah.
Well, Clyde and I did not dress up, but I am wearing my Darmok Angelad shirt, which has no bearing on what we're going to discuss today because it's a TNG episode.
I was thinking Alien, so I went
Hey,
with Marvin.
Marvin the Martian.
Yeah.
Who I'd rather
Okay.
hang out with in con. So
Well, let's dive into it, guys. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Released in theaters June 4th, 1982. Directed by Nicholas Meyer. Written by Jack B. Sowards from a story co-written by Sowards and Harv Bennett. Meyer was uncredited at the time, but he wrote a ton of the screenplay. He's really the top author here. And that awesome score is by James Horner. Guys, let's jump into it. I think it's time for some Star Trek II hot freaks.
Hot freaks.
this guy.
This guy.
Mariah, let's hear from you first. What's your hot freak?
Oh man, I really enjoyed this. So I watched this for the first time a couple weeks ago, actually, in preparation for what I thought was a different Patreon episode. But we are here now, and so I rewatched it again today, and it's just as exciting. The space battles are great. I thought all of the practical effects and the modeling looked very impressive, considering the budget they had for this. I really enjoyed a lot of little moments between. I think the relationship between Kirk and Spock is really, for me, the main focus of a lot of this movie, and sort of Kirk's dilemma and dealing with death and losing. He hates to lose. And so I just really enjoyed it. I had a great time. Kirstie Alley's character, I think, is really fun. I was sad she didn't come back for 3, and we'll get into that on a different part of the show. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed it.
Clyde, what's your hot freak?
The hard thing about this movie is that no, seriously,
Was that your Kirk?
that was my Kirk. That was my best Kirk.
What does God need with a
No,
starship?
I think the hardest thing about this movie is it's a sequel to a fairly famous episode, and so there's this struggle having never seen the original series Space Seed. So I think the first time I watched it, it felt like I was kind of walking in on the middle of an inside joke I didn't really know about. So that was a bit of a struggle.
Do you
This
think it's
time-
essential viewing? This
Well, there's
No.
a lot of. It's not essential, but I think there's a lot of hatred.
You mean
toward
the
Khan.
original series episode?
Yeah,
Is that essential viewing? No.
yeah. So, but,
To understand this movie, I don't think so. But go ahead.
well, I think I went back and kind of went through the memory alpha to kind of figure out, okay, what happened? Why is there so much anger toward Kirk? And that helped. It helped me kind of center. All right, I get it. He's a super bad guy. But all in all, I think to kind of quote what Mariah said, the space battles are great. The relationships are strong. I think if you were a fan of the original series, this was a great kind of extension of that, and that's what you want, right? So your characters came back, and they came back in a rich and lively way, true to who those characters were, and I thought that was pretty strong. So I enjoyed this. I'm not sure that I'm ready to say it's the best in the franchise, but I think the acting is pretty strong.
Grant, I was going to mock your Star Trek bona fides before I asked for your hot freak, but I can't now because you're literally dressed like, I was going to say Khan, but I think Khan's little buddy. You're kind of dressed like that little buddy who dies at the end when he's like, I will avenge you. So props to that. Give me
his
your
big,
hot freak.
dumb, dopey sons or whatever's going on.
Whatever they are. His groupies.
I don't know. The first time I watched this, it was with a group called Master Pancake here in Austin. They do live in movie theater riffs of movies, so they'll be on mic just making fun of it. It's kind of like Mystery Science Theater. So my exposure to this movie was already it being panned by them, just kind of them mocking the whole thing. So to go back and try and watch this sincerely was a little bit weird because it definitely is campy. There's parts of this that are really hokey, and I know that this movie has a degree of reverence from the Star Trek fandom that I don't feel a part of, I guess. So when I watch this, a lot of it is me kind of scratching my head and going, huh? This is the movie?
Yeah.
That shot where it looks like a musical theatrical production was like, what was their budget? At certain points, it looks like they didn't have a budget.
Yeah.
And
we'll
then
get
all of
into
a sudden
that.
there'll be like one special effect where it's like some rotating thing or the Genesis animation. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, that's where they put all their money, I'm guessing, back in 82. Because I
Well,
don't understand it elsewhere.
You're
Yeah, it
acting
was-
like camp is a bad thing.
I think camp is... I don't think it was intentional, I guess. That's where I'm
There
like...
was definitely some intentional camp in this. I think, for my hot freak, I think this is one of the best sci-fi adventure movies of all time. It's just as satisfying as any Star Wars movie. It's probably the best Trek movie ever made. It's definitely the most rewatchable for me. I've seen it like 10, 20 times. I've seen it on the big screen. I've seen it at home. I once saw it at a live event with Shatner hosting, which was awesome. It was, at the time, something of a gambit for Paramount and Star Trek as a franchise after the first movie did well at the box office, but it had like a lukewarm reception from fans and audience members. Many people called it Star Trek the Motionless Picture because it was just so long and plotting. So after that first movie, which we totally skip, we're not going to watch, there were a lot of shakeups behind the scenes after that first movie. They put Gene Roddenberry in the back seat creatively because he wanted Star Trek 2 to be about the Enterprise crew going back in time to stop the Klingons from screwing up the JFK assassination. So,
Why
Wow,
did
thank
they
you.
stop that?
No, that would have been.
so they hired a new creative team. They put Meyer, a TV writer, in charge. They slashed the budget for the production because the last movie went way over budget. So yeah, they had like no budget, and they used all the sets, and a lot of the effect shots are from the first movie. So, yeah, before this came out, Star Trek was kind of on the ropes. The feeling was if this movie didn't hit, that could be the end for Star Trek. So Paramount released it in 1982, and it was fucking incredible. I mean, fans loved it. General audiences embraced it. Critics liked it. To this day, critics like it. It had a budget of 11.2 million. Opening weekend, it brought in close to 15 mil, breaking box office weekend records at the time. It went on to gross about 80 mil worldwide. The Gambit paid off. It was a big hit. It breathed new life back into Star Trek. After a stumble with the first movie, this turned out to be a great, crowd pleasing, transformative sequel with a truly. It was just had that truly surprising emotional punch at the end that reminded everybody why these characters were so beloved and so iconic. I love this movie, if you can't tell. It's a fun spectacle, but at times it's also deep. It's also kind of irreverent and silly. It's also very moving at times. It's great. I love it.
So when I said, "Man, this movie is stupid," that probably didn't go over well with you.
Probably not.
I've known you for what 5, 6 years, so I kind of know where you're coming from, so it doesn't bother me. What I'm saying is you're an idiot.
Okay. That's what everyone
Nah.
says. I get
No, I get it. I get it. I mean, I remember the first time you and I had a conversation about Doctor Who, and you're like, "Oh, that's for children. That's garbage." So, I kind of get where your standards are.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, did I say that? But it is garbage.
Yeah.
That part did
Throw
work.
Grant under the bus much.
The fandoms
Wow.
are gonna come for him.
Exactly. People are gonna
Yeah.
hate Grant.
But
Bring
yeah,
it.
if you're listening to us for the first time, Grant is our newest Trekkie. He just got into Trek with Discovery, and refuses to watch all the old Star Trek stuff. So we're really surprised when Grant decided to join us on this episode.
So, do you think this is Star Trek putting its best player in the game? Is if you guys are trying to win me a new Trekkie, I don't even know what you would call me. If you were trying to win me over, would Star Trek Wrath of Khan be your best opportunity for that? Like, is this the one that like, oh, now he'll understand the wonder that is Star Trek?
I don't.
No,
No.
I,
I
I
don't think
wouldn't do
so.
that. Mainly because it's an old movie. It's 1982. They made it in 81, and it's a very low budget. The pace, compared to like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies, the pace is like watching molasses. Like it's so plodding. But
And
once,
Mike,
go ahead.
I was gonna say it was at a time where right now I feel like we're at a place where Star Trek or sci-fi in general is a moneymaker, right? Like people go, "Oh, you have a sci-fi idea? Let's do that because that's gonna make a ton of money." In '82, like you said, this was a gamble, and I think that shows up a little bit. So if you're not part of the Star Trek kind of world, this film can be a little misunderstood, I think.
Yeah, and I think, kind of going back to the camp thing, like especially with original Kirk and Spock, I think if you are not as familiar with the original series, some of the camp feels very silly unless like it's references back to the show. You know what I mean? I think fans really love this movie because there are so many references back to the show versus if you were coming in cold and not have seen any of the original series, and how high camp that could be, especially when it comes to encounters with other species and aliens. I thought the best scene for me that reminded me the most of the original series is going when they're on the planet and the bugs crawl into the ears. Like, I was like, oh, here it is. This is the camp that I wanted from this movie that carries over from the original series.
Nope.
Yeah, I think
Yep.
I think a lot of the issues that people have with the movie is just the fact that it's from 1982. It's pretty slow for our modern movie standards, and it's interesting that Clyde, you were talking about how you hadn't seen Space Seed, which this movie is kind of a sequel to, because I think the need to know Space Seed doesn't really come in until you meet Khan, and you're like, who is this guy? But within meeting him, within 2 minutes, he tells you his whole backstory, and he and Chekhov basically tell you the entire plot of Space Seed, so you're already caught up. So you don't really. I thought this movie does a really good job of, letting you know who this villain is and what the stakes are here. You don't necessarily have to have seen that episode.
I think the hard part for me originally was I heard it all, but I wanted to feel like Ricardo Montalban comes in with so much emotion, and I feel like he has to, so that I don't just scream the plane, the plane. But he does such a good job. Like, I believe that he hates Kirk. That because I was just told it, I was kind of like, wow, this guy really hates Kirk. I'm missing something. And so it kind of made me want to go back and go, well, I need to understand why he hates him so much.
Well, it's interesting because even if you watch Space Seed, that episode, you won't really get why he hates Kirk so much, because in the time between the episode and the movie, Khan's wife has died. She was killed by one of those bugs that they put in the ear, and he blames Kirk for that since Kirk marooned them there.
Right.
And they mention that in the movie. So the whole idea of why he really hates Kirk is
Yeah, like,
'cause
we
his
get it,
people
right?
died. Yeah.
Like, he got banished to this one planet, and then the neighboring planet blew up, knocked them off their course, and made their planet basically a dying planet that they're still
Exactly.
stuck on this entire time. I mean, I got it why he would hate Kirk. I enjoyed how much he kind of chews up the scenery, and I love the whatever the costume department must have, because I saw what Montalban looks like in that Space Seed episode. He looks completely different. It's like something happened where he got some Farrah Fawcett hair, and they
80s
watched Mad
happened.
Max, and they're like, oh, we need some sword and sandal shit in this movie. I don't know.
Yeah, Mariah's right. What happened was the 80s.
Yeah.
But I know we haven't technically started diving deeper into the film, but I thought the costume design was so good. Like, those Starfleet uniform jackets, like, I want one of those jackets.
Oh, with the peel.
Wait, one of the puffy ones that they're wearing,
the puffy with like
yeah.
the collar with the little vignettes on it. It was so cool. I'm into the maroon uniforms.
That I agree with. It felt like they learned something from Star Wars, and they actually upped their game on their jackets.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you watch the first movie, they're basically wearing like tan and blue pajamas from head to toe. And Nicholas Meyer was like, okay, this is part two is going to be a space action adventure with a lot of depth. I don't want my characters running around in pajamas. We got to redesign this shit. So they brought in the red. The reason they kept the red color was because they kept some of the pajama uniforms and they gave them to like background characters because of the budget. They didn't have budget to make new uniforms for everybody. So they just dyed them. And they did some dye tests, and the color that looked best was red to dye those old uniforms. So they just kept red. And they keep those red uniforms for the next like 4 or 5 movies. And they do look pretty awesome.
Do you want a fun Shatner fact about the uniform?
Yeah.
Bring it.
Apparently, so he like went on a mega diet to fit back into his uniform for
As he always does.
as he always does for this filming. But apparently, it's just like a big old fan of craft services, and so they had to remake his shirt 5 times throughout production.
Hey, don't sleep
Wow.
with craft services. There's nothing like
I get it.
food on set to You know, that's that's where I'm gonna blame my my extra poundage on craft
It's
services.
just Crafty's fault.
You
But
know
it's
who
like,
wasn't hitting up craft services? Montalban.
Not at all.
No.
Yeah, Meyer, and this is all in my later on in my research, but Meyer um, said part of the reason why Montalban and his crew look like savages is because they are. They're out in the wilderness. They're out and they're just wearing rags. They have. It makes sense for them to dress that way, and also it's such a heavy contrast from the Starfleet uniforms. Um, but
it kind
also
of,
they decided to dress him that way because he just had to show off Montalban's physique because
that
he was so
body.
amazing. Yeah,
I also thought it kind of reminds me of like the Lost Boys from Hook. It's like they've just been left to their own devices.
right.
It's kind of cool to think that if you're stranded somewhere, left to your own devices, you come out just like svelte, like yoked, right? So it's a nice thought.
That's what
Con
I
is
thought until week 3 of quarantine. It's not happening.
Well, I said I love this movie. Obviously, some of us are bigger fans than others. This is considered the best Star Trek movie by most of the human race, uh, except for Grant Davis. But I want to dive in a little deeper. I want to dive into some of the themes of this movie. I love that this movie is actually about something. It's just not. I mean, it's just not just like to shoot 'em up or this space, laser fest. It gives you all the sci-fi adventure stuff in spades, but it also very much is about aging and the importance of friendship and coping with death and rebirth. Like the theme of aging and mortality is there from the beginning with Bones giving Kirk the reading glasses and Kirk dealing with the fact that he's aging and he's not this ageless adventurer that we saw in the show.
Damn it,
And
Jim.
exactly. And then there's Bones. There's Bones and Spock telling Kirk to get his command back, that he doesn't have to be a deathbound admiral because he's middle aged. Like, I think what the writers did here was they looked back at the episodes because everyone who worked on this in terms of the writing was not very well versed in Star Trek. They just gave them all the episodes to watch because Gene Roddenberry was fucking losing his mind. Didn't want him to drive the movie, and so the new writers and the new director thought, okay, the only way really to add depth here is to actually mark the passage of time and make these heroic characters who never age on the TV show actually deal with loss and death and middle age and all these hard issues that people in who are their age would actually deal with. And upon rewatching this movie, those themes of aging and death and birth and rebirth are really woven into every scene. There's also the theme of revenge, of course. But what really is Nicholas Meyer wanted to call this Star Trek to the Undiscovered Country, and that was a reference to a Shakespeare reference. The undiscovered country is death, and he wanted this movie. This movie does have a lot of themes of death.
Yeah, I wrote down a note right on my second rewatch about how right at the very beginning Kirk looks at Spock and says, "Aren't you dead?"
hmm
And I was like, "Ooh, foreshadowing."
Yeah, well, apparently it had leaked that Spock was going to die in this movie with the fans because the fans had like zines and letter writing campaigns, and someone knew that Spock was going to die, and the production had heard that the fans know that we're going to kill Spock, and so they tried to put out disinformation out there, like, no, he's not going to die, and so that's why they rewrote the beginning of the movie with the Kobayashi Maru test with Kirstie Alley, in which Spock, quote unquote, dies during the test, and then, he gets up and Kirk says that joke, "Aren't you dead?"
Ah.
Because they wanted to throw fans off.
Haha.
Yeah, so it works for that, and it also works as foreshadowing, like really good foreshadowing. And speaking of death, on this fun Easter podcast,
Spock is risen.
Spock is risen in the next movie, but of course the theme of death is there with Spock sacrificing himself, like, and then Kirk learning to move on as a wiser man and learning to embrace his mortality and how complex life can be as you grow old. And then there's the theme of rebirth with the Genesis planet. I mean, not just with the planet, but with the hope that Spock will be reborn, which of course he will be, and Kirk is thematically reborn and rejuvenated at the end of the movie. He says he feels young. That's one of my favorite parts of the movie. He loses his friend, but he gains his son, so his life is now full of a different kind of promise.
Oh, but he
it's
gains
just great.
that son. I mean, who's proud of that doofus? Oh, he's such a Boy Scout. I'm like, dude, you're like a 35-year-old doctor. Why are you acting like a petulant 12-year-old the entire movie? You're a doctor.
Who like invented a way to bring about life on planets
Right.
with your
Did they-
mom.
Did they not give this guy show notes on what age he's supposed to be and what
No.
level of maturity? I did not understand that character. It was so awful.
Yeah.
I feel like he had all the anger of Kirk with none of the cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like
He got all the bad Kirk
all
qualities.
the bad Kirk genes.
Just
yeah.
Danny DeVito all around.
Well, it's interesting because he's a scientist, and this movie's strange because it positions the science crew almost against the Starfleet crew, and this is the first time in Star Trek where Starfleet, I believe, is referred to as the military,
yeah.
and something to be questioned and maybe not completely trusted by other Federation citizens. And David, Kirk's son, completely embodies that. He's like, we're doing something for the greatness of all, all species. We're rejuvenating dead planets and moons, but the military is probably going to want to use it as a weapon. And I don't know, it made sense to me story-wise. It also made sense thematically. He doesn't know Kirk is his dad. All he knows is that his mom used to run around with this crazy starship captain that he resents. And once he sees Kirk, he's tricked into thinking that Kirk is the one that tried to take the Genesis thing away from them, and he's convinced into thinking Kirk's the bad guy. So it makes complete sense to me,
But
the way he acts.
are we going to have to endure David in the next two movies?
David is in the next movie.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, he doesn't have as big as a part, I don't think, but he's in the next movie.
I think it also makes sense because if we know that, how do I say this? I'll just say it. If we know that Kirk is the pimp that he is, it would make sense that at some point he'd have a kid.
happened.
Yes.
This isn't his only kid.
I mean, I would be surprised that Riker's another one that needs a baby to pop up somewhere. But yeah, so I mean that made sense. I thought it was like, okay, yeah, this completely makes sense that he'd have a kid. I mean, I would think that his kid would be a little less of a doctor baby, but I wasn't surprised.
I saw we got a comment from Marg who said, "I hate David's sweater." And yeah, I hate David's face.
Let's go easy
I'm
on
glad
David.
we spent some time
David.
on David. here.
Let's
I'm
go
with
easy
David.
on David. The actor who played him passed away from HIV/AIDS in the 90s.
Oh wow.
It's not a slight
mean-
on the guy himself.
The actor is fine. The character is annoying.
No,
Yeah.
no, no.
Played
I
an
feel,
annoying
I feel like a
character
jerk
very
now.
well.
The
I
acting was
absolutely
also
feel
not
terrible.
good. It's
I
unfortunate
think
what happened to the human.
I think that's the way I felt about David the first time I watched this, but subsequent viewings, maybe I'm used to it. It just doesn't bother me anymore.
Mm.
I did like the David and Kirk fight scene. I thought it was very funny.
Yeah, it was funny. Well,
But what about Khan and his posse? I was under the impression that blonde Khan and all of his big blonde doofus boys were all his sons, but I guess that's not all his sons and daughters. They just are all. Is it supposed to be some sort of
I think it was all his
blonde,
crew.
blue-eyed kind of weird master race shit going
yeah,
on there?
Yeah, the idea is there was illegal genetic cloning going on, and these are the superior genetic race that was.
Do they not age?
They age very slowly.
Okay, because he
Yeah.
said like, "Oh, we've been trapped on this planet 15 years." I'm like, was it you and a bunch of like 12-year-old kids then for a bit?
And then he also tells Sulu, there's no way, not Sulu, the other one, Chekhov, yeah. He tells Chekhov, like, you can't turn these people against me. They swore allegiance to me 200 years before you were born. So, yeah,
Okay.
they're pretty old.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
and he was in stasis. They were all in stasis for a while.
That's true
Mhm.
too. Yeah.
Yep.
so they nailed what 1996 was like. Obviously, in '82, they knew
Right.
exactly how it was going to go down.
Mhm.
Let's talk about the performances a little more from the main crew. I think the core of Kirk, Bones, and Spock. I think they're so good in this movie. Those three guys, Shatner, DeForest Kelly, Leonard Nimoy, they're so light-footed and fun in this movie. They play these characters like with a deep sense of their backstory and connection to one another, but they never feel heavy-handed. You could tell they're just having a blast. What'd you think about the core trio?
Yeah, I liked the Cortio performances. I'm always sad when Uhura isn't included more often in these because I think she's such an integral part of that bridge crew. And I know she has like stuff going on during the plot of this movie, but I'm always just like, let's just bring her along. She's a badass. Come on, like bring her into the plot. But yeah, the three of them are obviously showing how long they've been working with each other as these characters. Like they know them inside and out. Um, they understand how they treat each other and they understand how to communicate without saying words, and I think that that is done and woven really well throughout the plot as they have all of these, you know, sort of like wink wink nudge nudge, you know what to do, you know what to do, I don't have to say anything, and then we do the big reveal at the end, and it makes sense because of how well all these characters know each other.
Yeah, I think what I really loved about these characters were the authenticity that they had, or the consistency that they had to the characters that we grew to know, right? Like it was Bones was Bones as he's always been, and Spock was Spock, and Kirk was every bit as Kirk. You know, even Scotty and Sulu and Chekhov and Uhura, like the performances were just so consistent, right? And it's like it let me know, wow, these actors have been doing this at a high level for a very long time. That I can see them and not anyone else, right? It almost felt effortless,
In
and I
contrast
love
to
that.
Picard, where we get like an irritable hermit who half the galaxy hates or something in the new iteration.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, Grant, because I think that was something that I was really struggling with. Is that when we got to Picard, that wasn't the Picard that we knew, right? That performance largely was a little bit different. Even Riker, and I hate to say anything negative about Jonathan Frakes, but even Riker didn't quite seem Riker. It seemed more than Riker, right? It seemed like I felt like I'm looking at Riker, who's now gone on to be a really successful director and have all these other projects and become, a celebrity. I wasn't really looking at the original Will Riker. In this film, I'm looking at like I'm seeing the characters, right, in their essence, and I love that. I love that it gave me what I wanted as a Trek fan.
Yeah, this might sound insane to say, but I think Shatner is actually pretty restrained in a lot of these scenes. Like, we remember him overacting and the whole Khan screaming, of course, which is
Con,
insane. But
con, con,
but
con.
the scene, like the scene with Spock's death and the beginning when Bones gives him the glasses and they talk about how he should go and even though he's middle aged, he should still be manning a starship, and his scenes with Carol and David, and at the end when he quotes Dickens, he really nails those quiet scenes. Like you really feel like the internal struggle he's going through, even though he does have some really loud, crazy moments.
You know, I had watched, oh man, what's it called, Galaxy Quest. I'd seen
Yeah.
Galaxy Quest before I had seen this movie,
Hmm.
and in watching Galaxy Quest now, I have a better understanding of what their frame of reference was when they had Alan, what's his name,
Alan
uh,
Rickman.
Tim
Alan
Allen.
Rickman,
Oh.
uh, who must be essentially playing the Spock character.
Hmm.
This is an actor with a lot of gravitas who is forced to kind of play with an overacting knucklehead, Tim Allen, William Shatner,
Yeah.
and his apathetic crewmates or whatever. And I'm like, okay, this is what they were parodying, And I felt like when I was watching Leonard Nimoy, I was like, I feel like the level of what he was doing in most of his scenes was like a little bit up there, a little bit higher.
Hmm.
It felt just like natural and effortless, where it felt like everyone else was like, all right, we got to step up our game. We got to go for these scenes, and we have to really try and make it other people feel it.
Yeah, definitely one of the things that ages the worst is Walter Koenig as Chekhov. But it's weird though. Like sometimes he's really bad, and in some scenes he's really good. It's just back and forth. It's really weird.
What's the deal with Scotty? That he's like, is he just like still a blue collar dude who's like relegated to the engineering room or whatever?
Well, I think the whole idea is that
much.
the Enterprise crew is training this new crew. So Scotty is down. The lead engineer, and he's training the new engineering crew to take over the Enterprise. But since this emergency happens with Khan and everything, Kirk takes over the ship, and the old crew decides to take over the ship, and the new crew just is kind of the support crew in the back, and Scotty is manning engineering down there.
Yeah, I felt like I thought that character was kind of like one of the main people,
Mm.
him and Uhuru, and like I didn't really
Uhura?
see them. Uhura, okay.
Uhura. Yeah, this movie doesn't. This movie really focuses on Bones, Kirk, and McCoy and they give some lip service to the other characters, and a very close up of Chekhov's ear, that is unforgettable.
No, not Chekhov's ear. A very big close up of some paper mache ear that I made in high
Mhm.
school.
Yeah,
I'm gonna have
that
nightmares
that
about
was
tonight.
they made a cast of his ear, and they put it on a plate, and then they filmed that. That's what they did. Montalban. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I did like that they wanted to remind everyone, even though they're like Kirk is getting old, but we're gonna put Kirstie Alley in here so that you remember that Kirk fucks. Like,
He once was virile.
yeah, and like
And he's
their
like-
weird tension in the elevator and like all these different moments that they have with each other. I just thought it was really funny.
I kind of love pre-MAGA Kirstie Alley in this. Like, she's beautiful. She's got this mix of naivete and slyness to her, and she makes it so you're not questioning the character, because it seems like she's positioned to be the new Spock. The one that Spock's going to hand the baton to.
Yeah.
So she's solid. It's a bummer she didn't return for the other movies, but she's really solid. I like that for a Vulcan, she shows a lot of emotion. Like at the funeral, she's crying, and she's always speaking her mind, and she just seems like a really like hot-blooded Vulcan. And as you go on in series, you know there are some hot-blooded Vulcans, but I think she was one of the first to really portray more of an emotional Vulcan. And I know that in the original script, there were some lines of dialogue that confirmed that she was supposed to be half Romulan, half Vulcan, and that was supposed to explain why she's more emotional than Spock is.
Mm.
But Meyer ripped that out of the script, and he said, no, she should just be a Vulcan, because it's more interesting if she's just a Vulcan with emotions. I think that's true.
Yeah.
You don't need to like explain it away, I don't think.
So, Mike, you were talking about some of these different themes that are being explored: the death and resurrection, and just kind of coping with one's mortality.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm kind of curious about, and what we keep circling back to in our discussions of like Star Trek Discovery and Picard, is the role of Starfleet and how they put themselves up on a pedestal, and yet they are problematic. And this movie seems to point out a huge flaw in Starfleet, but it doesn't really follow that up with, once again, any sort of accountability. And I would say that is in the actions of Kirk, and as a representative of Starfleet, him and his crew sending Khan off to a planet and banishing them, and then doing no due diligence to even check up on him. I think that Khan did have a legitimate gripe against
Yeah.
Kirk here, and it seems like, oh, we're just gonna have a space battle, but I'm gonna win the day and not have to think about what I did.
Well, that's a different department. He's a starship captain. the administration that goes along with checking up on civilizations. That's a different part of the Federation altogether. It's like that's a different group.
Yeah,
And they were not
Blame
doing
the
their
bureaucracy.
job. I'm just saying.
the bureaucrats dropped the ball, not the space captains, man.
Yes.
The pencil pushers
Think about
back
it.
home
When
in
does
San
he have to?
Fran.
He is flying all over the galaxy, saving us.
He's
Right?
flying. He's fucking. He's busy.
I'm telling you. And at some point, he's got to save the whales. So, with all that going on, he does not have time to check in on a planet that he thought everything was cool at. I'm just saying.
But even when confronted with this, he's just kind of like, "Ah, fuck you. We're gonna blow up your ship too, and we're gonna ruin you guys some more."
He's
I don't
like,
know.
you started it. I'm gonna finish it.
I mean, he was pushed into a corner. I mean,
Yeah.
with
And nobody
Monte,
puts Kirk in a corner.
no, with Montalban, I mean, he is so committed to this role. You feel that he is just this force that will not stop. Like, he's insane. And as soon as Kirk sees him again, that is clearly communicated. So Kirk is just backed into a corner, and he's like, I gotta fuck this guy up because he is living to fuck me up. He could have stolen this ship and gone anywhere he wanted, but no, he found me. So I gotta fight.
And keeps killing other people besides just Kirk. Like
Like a
his
bad
whole
marksman,
thing-
you keep missing the target.
Nice. That was pretty good, Mike.
Thanks.
One thing that I had to think about was we just did this whole kind of look into Picard, right? And we see Picard who stepped away and who struggled with his being away from his ship, right? And it was really interesting as we're watching this, and I'm, with that in mind, Kirk, was basically in the same situation, right? Regulated to kind of ride a desk, and the people around him was, even Spock said, the best thing that you could do is to be a captain again, right? And it just seemed, when I looked at it, I said, the biggest difference between Kirk and Picard is that Kirk had his crew with him, right? Picard had a bunch of newbies that I like, but it was interesting to see the comparison between kind of Kirk kind of moving on from being a captain and Picard moving on from being a captain. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but Kirk was much, much better than Picard.
Yeah.
That'll be the first and last time I ever say those words.
Kirk actually had more grace moving on from captain than Picard did, it seemed. I want to talk about, Grant, you brought up the theme of death again. The theme of Kirk cheating death is so good. Like, he cheats at the Kobayashi Maru test, which is supposed to be a no-win scenario in which everybody dies. And he cheats later by tricking Khan because he still doesn't believe in no-win scenarios. So he's always doing these tricks. Like, this is almost a commentary on the Kirk from the original series, because he knew by the end of the episode everybody was going to get off scot-free, even though whatever the threat was, no one's going to die, we're going to move on. But this time, when Kirk comes across this no-win scenario and Khan traps him in the middle of that planet, Kirk has a way out because he lied and he cheated. But this time it cost him Spock. So it's like the movie is telling us this is Star Trek for grown-ups now. There are consequences to the actions, like in the real world, and the characters have to deal with that now. But they're going to deal with it as gracefully as they can. Like, it's great.
Temporary consequences. Spock comes back.
But we don't
Well,
know that yet, Grant.
yeah.
Right.
You're jumping ahead.
I know what the
Spoiler.
name of the next movie is.
But,
Actually,
I mean, and
go ahead.
I was going to say, and when we do eventually talk about, Search for Spock on Patreon, Leonard Nimoy was very adamant about not including his name in the opening credits, so that you did not know whether or not he was going to come back or not until the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
I like that there's some really like sly, cheeky shit in this movie, like that you don't really pick up on unless you watch it a few times. Like when Kirk and Bones and Spock first show up on the Enterprise and Scotty's down there with all the engineers. Bones said Scotty had a wee bout of the shore leave that Dr. McCoy helped him with. I think that means
He got the
Bones-
clap, right?
Bones got the clap.
I thought it was thought he was just a little hungover.
Mm,
It was more than that.
He had a little too much fun on shore leave.
yeah.
Yeah.
Good for Scotty.
Yeah, like some of the other stuff that doesn't really age well, like the pacing can seem a little plotting, especially the first half of the movie. Walter Koenig's performance is kind of weird. Oh, I have some. Well, what do you guys want to do? You want to go into some of my favorite scenes, or some
I
of
want
the
to
behind the
bitch.
scenes stuff?
I want to bitch about the intro title sequence and how that was like 4 hours of the movie. I was sitting there watching Spaceballs fly past me with people's names for what felt like 45 minutes.
1982, but
Yeah, I was gonna be like 1982. I watch a lot of 70s like B horror movies, and like that is what you get of 10 minutes of just like scenic, picturesque
Oh.
things, and then like bugs, and then names for 10 minutes. So this
Well-
was at least slightly more
Yeah.
interesting.
I would go back
Yeah.
and revisit a lot of these early 80s movies, but man, I was just like, can I fast forward or do I need to endure this? Maybe I need to endure this. Maybe there's
No.
something about it.
I appreciate you enduring this very
It's-
much.
I fast forwarded.
it's like your last chance to go get a snack before the movie starts, right?
Yeah, that's how it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk some favorite scenes. Obviously, Spock's death is probably the best scene in the movie, or the best acted scene. It's what everybody remembers, other than Kirk screaming Khan in the middle of the movie. I still get emotional every time I see it. Just the vulnerability on display from these two performers who have, for so long, played these kind of infallible heroes, are now dealing with this abrupt, painful reality of death. It's just huge, and if you don't know it's going to come, it's just so surprising, and it's this beautiful scene. I love that scene. That's probably my favorite scene. But I also really love Khan's first scene. Just right away, I'm kind of pulled in when Montalban takes off his headgear, and he's so quietly threatening, and he tells like his whole story about why he hates Kirk and all that, and he just takes like command of the movie at that point. And the scene builds, and you kind of realize, oh shit, this guy's really gonna fuck some shit up. And then he pokes that gross alien scorpion bug thing and pulls out the babies, and then drops them in the
Clyde's
fucking
like,
ears.
why do we keep
Why
talking
do we
about
keep
the
talking
ears?
about this?
I'm surprised we're not talking about that more. When this was first aired on TV, the BBC cut those scenes, those close-ups of the ears and the bug going in and out, because the comptroller of the BBC said those are nearing X-rated. We can't show that.
Oh man,
Oh, the
it's
BBC.
penetration. I get it. Um,
What other favorite scenes do you guys have? Do you have any other favorite scenes?
I totally had the same one. I mean, I love the introduction. I think getting it to see a scene where you have the good guy and the bad guy in the same room, and it wasn't Kirk, but it was Chekhov in the same room, and just getting that interaction, it feels so different than the rest of the movie where they're all just talking to each other over comms and shooting lasers across space at each other. It felt more personal in that moment. And yeah, the whole reveal of these alien people with their costumes out in the sand before the big reveal, and his metal glove and like all of it, I was like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
this is kind of cool. And him just being just hammy with his acting, I loved it.
Oh yeah, it's funny because he is hammy, but you also believe him. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
felt like he's hammy because he's from 1996. That's how they were back then. I don't know if you kids remember, but ooh.
Yeah, yeah. He listened to a lot of Pearl Jam.
But what was up with the captain? Like Chekhov's there with some other dude, some other captain that gets brainwashed,
Right.
and that guy somehow got to the rank of captain and did nothing. He didn't say anything. He just sat there and went, "Give me my earbug, please, whenever you're ready."
Yeah.
I mean,
good
he
old Paul
sacrificed
Winfield.
himself, though, which I
Yep.
think is the ultimate act of the captain. You know, I think that was his final moment to show that he was and still was a captain.
I was just disappointed with the writing for the character that they didn't even have him say anything. He didn't take the lead and try and be proactive in that situation, negotiate anything. I mean, maybe they were pressed for time or something, but it just felt weird that it was Chekhov and this guy was just disposable in that moment.
Yeah.
He
Well,
wasn't
if you
wearing
do,
a red shirt, so
if you do want to see Paul Winfield doing some great deep acting in Star Trek, you can watch this episode of Star Trek, Darmok and Jalad, because he plays the main alien in this episode, and he's fucking awesome.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I loved the opening scene.
Yes,
with
that's what I was gonna say
the
too, Clyde.
Kobayashi Maru. I mean,
hmm
Kobayashi Maru is like Star Trek code word, right? Like if there was a club where only Trekkies could go, and you got to the door and they said, "What's the password?" That password would be Kobayashi Maru.
Clyde, would you rather have a Vulcan hello or the Kobayashi Maru?
That guy right there. I'm gonna go with the Kobayashi Maru. No win situation. No, I think because it's this thing in Star Trek lore that is just when if you say Starfleet Academy, somewhere in the back of your mind you're thinking Kobayashi Maru, and in this movie we get to see it. Right? It's often talked about.
Was this the
but
first
here
time
it
they
is.
show it?
Yes,
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
so-
and
Yeah.
I think one of the writers named it after his neighbors.
Because I saw Chris Pine like whoop its ass in the first movie. It was great.
You know, it's the second movie. Actually, I really enjoyed that scene because we never see Kirk actually take the Kobayashi Maru until that movie, and it was actually a pretty fun scene.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that was something that even if you skipped the TOS series and the movies and you came in later, it's it's worth watching this movie just for that, right? Just to see it. So I love the fact that they started with it. It was kind of a little bit of fan service, I think, but I
Because
loved
isn't it like really heavily featured in all the novels and stuff too?
I don't know.
I think.
Was it known before this movie that that Kirk cheated it in that way? That
No.
he like rigged the programming?
No, that's all brought up for this
So-
movie. That,
Oh,
that
okay.
that's
cool.
all brought up for the theme of Kirk always cheating death and never having to worry about it until this movie. You know, I love Kirk and Khan seeing each other for the first time via the bridge Zoom call. For me, this
Just
is
like
even
us,
better.
They have to be
Just
social
like us,
distance.
yeah. For me, this is even better than that previous space battle that leads up to it. It's just Khan is so threatening, and Kirk is trying to outsmart him, and it's a lot of fun. Kirk is like really sneaky. He has to put on his glasses to see the combination code. He's like, "Damn it!" And the shields drop, and Kirk blasts Khan's ship, and Khan goes nuts, and they end up into stalemate, and with only their wits left. And then they go into the nebula, and that stuff is really creepy. All the space stuff here is really great. That
And
final
buy the
scene,
book.
by the book.
Buy the book.
That final scene with everyone on the bridge saying goodbye to Genesis after Kirk and David embrace, and Kirk realizes that he's gained a son. Like Kirk quotes A Tale of Two Cities to honor Spock, and he says, "I feel young." Like Shatner is so surprising in this movie. Like he's so good in that scene, and then that the music swells. You see Spock's coffin, and then it transitions into to Nimoy giving us the space, the final frontier scene. Just such a great ending too. It leaves you, even though they kill off the most beloved character in the series, arguably, this movie really leaves you with a sense of hope and like new purpose, just like the characters, especially Kirk.
Mariah, what were you feeling the most?
Of all of the scenes,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
do
mean,
you have your
I-
favorite scene?
yeah, I love the opening. I love the Kobayashi Maru. I like that it's almost like a bait and twist at the very beginning because you don't know it's a drill until everything sort of stops. Especially because it is the first time they've let that whole sequence play out on film or in the TV show. I also love the elevator scene between Kirk and Sarvik because I think it's just really funny when it opens and then Bones is just like, "What took so long?" Like he's so cranky and bonesy. I just like the continual problem solving and like Kirk trying to out Kirk himself. Like he's constantly trying to move that forward, and so seeing that consistently work and work and work until it can't work anymore. And I agree with you, Mike. Like that scene between Kirk and Spock, I think is the best scene of the movie. as they're saying goodbye. But you know Spock has something up his sleeve when he does the mini mind meld with Bones right at the very end. You're like, something is happening. They're setting something up, obviously, for the next movie. And I just really enjoyed that Spock was like, Kirk can't Kirk himself out of this, so I'm going to have to do this for him. You
Right.
know,
Yeah, and after he dies, Kirk. What is that quote from Tale of Two Cities? I think I
It is
wrote
the
it down.
best of time. It was
Best
the
of
worst
time.
of times.
Yeah.
Oh well, he says that at the beginning
when he gets
Uh,
the book, yeah.
when he gets the book, and he asks Spock, what does that mean? Spock's like,
it
"Happy
is
birthday."
a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before. A far better resting place I go than I have ever been. That one.
Yeah, he says that after Spock dies. This is about this. This is the second most famous line from A Tale of Two Cities, and the first is that opening one, obviously. But this quote is about someone committing the ultimate selfless act, like sacrificing themselves for others and finding great fulfillment in that. So when Bones asks Kirk what he's saying, Kirk says, "That's not Bones. It's the scientist." Kirk just says, "Oh, just something Spock was trying to tell me on my birthday." And it dovetails back to that earlier scene in the film when Kirk was asking Spock about his thoughts on Tale of Two Cities. Like, Nicholas Meyer did a great job of just really baking in these themes to this entire movie. It just makes it so much deeper on rewatch.
I was going to say on like the opposite end of that, I also really liked the scene between Kirk and his ex right when they kind of get to the second transporter location where Genesis has been beamed to. And Kirk has that realization. He just punched his son in the face because he sees her. And she's like, David. And he's like, David? Oh,
Yeah.
shit. Like, wait.
Is that David?
That's yeah. He's gotten
Yeah.
big.
He's such a little shit. I don't know if it's appropriate for us to talk about scenes that we don't like.
Yeah.
But aside from David scenes, when they go into talking about the Genesis project, there is a point right after they watch the little intro video of like, here's what Genesis is, where they have Bones basically turn apropos of nothing and start going on a rant about the problems with this. And then like I think Kirk is like, what are you talking about? He's like, how dare you? How dare you be dismissive of this? This thing can destroy worlds as it's making them. This is the worst of everything. And it was like out of nowhere, out of left field, he's basically trying to make the writer's argument of why Genesis could also be a bad thing, but it just felt forced, and it was I was so mad about that.
That's
scene.
cool. I love getting that perspective from you because as a Star Trek fan, with that scene, I'm just seeing the writers use Bones as a device to deliver that and being smart about it because that is something Bones would do in that instant. That is just so the character.
Like just freak out, like
He,
out
well,
of nowhere.
He always identifies he always brings out his anxieties about everything,
Oh.
like whether it's a transporter, he's always the one who's like, I'm not going on that fucking thing, everything. He'll bring out his anxieties and he'll point out the dangers of every situation. Like you saw the J.J. Abrams movies. Remember, he doesn't want to go into space and he gets space sick and he's
Right,
scared.
okay.
Yeah, so that's the character. But
Huh.
if you don't know that's the character, it does seem kind of odd. Yeah.
And I think speaking of J.J. Abrams, what I got out of that scene was Lost started to make sense to me in a new way, right? Because if you think about Lost and J.J. Abrams and kind of the Dharma Initiative and the manuals, it's straight out of this episode, right? It's straight out of this movie. It's basically the same thing. It's like, oh, I see where this came from now. And it just kind of clicked, and I was like, oh, I get it. If David was left to his own devices, this is he would end up on the Lost Island. That's
Oh,
what
there
he
you go,
would do.
Grant. You got to watch it again.
I have to go back.
Okay, I'm going to give you 3 bits of dialogue. You tell me what's your favorite, guys. Let's see. Kirk to Savick at the beginning of the movie. How we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life, wouldn't you say? So that's number one.
Except I am Kirk, and I never deal with death.
Oh, your audio just went a little funky.
Yeah, it's
I
gone full
know.
robot.
Yeah.
Does it still sound super robot-y?
It's doing that thing it was doing that one time. Yeah.
No. Okay, I'm gonna unplug and plug back in, and we'll see what happens. I'll be
All right.
back.
Cool.
Goodbye. It was
Okay.
great to know you.
Live long and prosper. Okay, Bones to Kirk. Damn it, Jim. What the hell's the matter with you? Other people have birthdays. Why are we treating yours like a funeral? I like that
Okay.
one.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, and the last one is Khan. He tasks me.
Yes.
He tasks me, and I shall have him. I'll chase him round the moons of Nibia, and round the Antares maelstrom, and round perdition flames before I give him up. Prepare to alter course.
That one
That
by
one.
far.
I think you have to go with anything that starts with, "Damn it, Jim." You just
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what
Yeah.
happens after that.
Okay, well, here's the fourth one. It's my favorite. From hell's heart I stab at thee. For hate's sake I spit my last breath at thee. So literary. He's just quoting Moby Dick left and right, this guy. I love it.
He tasks me. I
He
love
tasks
that
me.
one. It feels Blade Runner esque too in a way.
Doesn't it? It's just
Yeah.
like when oh god, what's the actor who plays
Rutger
the,
Hauer.
Rutger Hauer is doing his Tears in the Rain speech.
Right.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah. Mariah, you back?
I think so. Do I
Yay.
sound better?
You sound good.
Yay.
So we decided that Khan has the best lines.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And he's always just like lounging when he says them, like,
He
look
tasks
at my
me.
bare, beautiful
Yes, with
chest
the
with this
chest open.
giant scar and my monocles of makeup and
But you know what? If I looked like Ricardo Montalban, I wouldn't wear mini
I
shirts
mean-
either. I'm just saying.
No.
It'd
I-
be
This
a
is why I
scarf.
don't wear shirts. People say we
Mm.
look alike.
and that party mullet was excellent. It
Yeah,
was
the bangs and the feather and the party mullet. Oh,
I
it's
know
so
I
good.
really tried to Farrah Fawcett this thing up, but it's just a very dry Party City wig. It does glow in the dark though for extra fun at
It is
some
good.
point.
So I have some fun facts.
Okay.
Fun fact.
Lay 'em on us.
So in the original Khan episode, Space Seed, Khan never meets Chekhov in that episode, although he recognizes Chekhov at the beginning of this movie. Space Seed was a season 1 episode, and Chekhov and Walter Koenig didn't show up till season 2. So it
Nice.
kind of threw fans for a loop. Like, why does Chekhov know? This doesn't make sense. So Koenig used to tell a joke at the conventions that off screen in Space Seed, Chekhov took too long in the bathroom on the Enterprise, making Khan wait, and that's why he hates him. And apparently, guys, surprise to me, there's a Star Trek novel that explains how Chekhov knows Khan. Who knew?
Clyde, can you tell us about it?
Nope.
What happened in it?
In Kirk's apartment, Kirk has a 1980s Commodore PC computer in his apartment.
Dang, future.
And many people think Shatner put it in there because he was a spokesperson for the Commodore PCs at the time.
Just a little light product placement.
Exactly.
Nice. Nothing wrong with capitalism, right?
No.
Wow.
Did you guys watch the animated short trek from season 2, Ephraim and Dot? So apparently it depicts the Enterprise battle with the Reliant in this movie. It's really fun. Kirstie Alley said that she loved Spock so much as a kid that she used to sleep with her Spock ears on. I think that's a lie.
Hmm.
I was like, that would be really funny because she was about to sleep with Kirk with some Spock ears on. Oh.
Oh. What's the age difference? How young was she in this?
I think she's in her 20s.
She's in her early 20s, yeah.
Yeah,
this
for
bef-
sure.
This is before Cheers, right?
This
Yeah,
is before
before
Cheers.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah. What
I
else?
thought she did a really good job, though.
I know. I also don't really love the actress who replaces her in the
Robin
next couple of-
Curtis. Yeah.
I mean, she's like a fine actress. I just didn't think the character like felt like the same character at all.
No.
How dare
she's-
you? The actress died later. Guys, don't laugh at
So,
that.
so good.
The only reason I said that is because I took a lot of shit from one listener when I started making fun of a character, and they're like, "That person."
I
died."
remember. The person died.
Okay, let's jump to some
No
listener
bearing.
comments. K Young says Grant looks more like Khan than Cumberbatch ever did in Into Darkness. Very true.
Yes.
Yeah, that portrayal of Khan it's fine. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers other people. I kind of like Into Darkness. I don't know.
I also, if you actually look at Khan from the original series episode, he does not have the white hair. It is
No.
like a pretty clean cut, like black pushback thing. I don't know, men's haircuts a thing.
Yeah, it looks almost they
Like a
style him.
ponytail, right?
It's
They
very
style
different.
him almost Asian. It's interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
Khan is supposed to be from North India.
Right.
And
That's right.
so in the original series, the makeup and the hairstyle has him looking like he is Sikh. And then they just went, 80s with it in the movie.
Which is
And
probably for the best instead
made
of
him
doing
disco.
a little light brown
Yep.
face.
Yep, that was going to go very wrong very fast.
So Marge says, "Oh, she wanted us to talk about the Kobayashi Maru and its significance in the film." And I think we covered that pretty well. It's just Kirk, the theme of Kirk cheating death and basically being a TV character who gets away with everything at the end of the episode. And now, this is Star Trek for grown-ups. Somebody dies, he has to deal with it, and he has to move on after his plan gets his best friend killed.
Well, and I'd add to that the whole idea around the Kobayashi Maru is that as a leader, at some point you have to face this no-win situation, and understanding that no matter what you do, someone is going to die. And can you send people out to their death? And it's kind of, I think it's used as like the final test of can you be an officer? And I think we've seen it in many treks. And I think one of my favorite is when we watched Deanna Troi go through it when she was kind of applying for her to be an officer, an actual like command deck officer. So I mean,
Right.
it's part of the very fabric of Trek, in that to be great, there's this great sacrifice that you may have to be called on, and
Yeah.
you can't sit in a big chair if you're not gonna do it.
And the whole idea is Kirk never had to face that because he's the hero. He's
And
not
all the red shirts are disposable.
exactly. Yeah.
Who
and
gave a
this-
shit about them, but no one
Yeah.
in his little circle of buddies.
Yeah, and now
Until
this movie
now.
says no. Yeah. Young says I totally missed the significance of Spock saying "remember" to McCoy until Search came out. Part 3 came out. Yeah. Did you catch that, Grant, when Spock does the mini mind meld with Bones?
Yeah, and he's like, remember. But I was like, remember what? That you sacrificed yourself? Maybe that's
Remember, so
why
I
he
can
went to go?
direct the next one.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really put it together that they're like, there will be a sequel, audience.
Mm-hmm.
Wink.
Yeah. If this movie came out today, we'd be like, "Oh, sequel, great."
Yeah.
Yeah.
There'd already be a cue
Or
card at the end
6,
that's
yeah.
just like Star Trek will be back in blah blah blah, like they always like to do.
Here's
Spock
one.
will live once more.
Here's one good question for Grant. Derek Orr says, "Talk about the ship battle scenes compared to Discovery."
I mean, I liked them. I thought they were excellent for the time period. I thought all the
Yeah.
models looked great. I thought the special effects with the budget that they had also looked great. Maybe I'm just so jaded because I watched so much bad 70s P horror and sci-fi that I'm just like, man, this is impressive. Like
For the time, it was really sophisticated, especially for the budget they had, and especially for the fact that they had to splice in a lot of those shots from the first movie that were left on the cutting room floor. I think it holds up to this day. The Nebula, the Nebula dogfight looks amazing, and it's really tense too. And I brought up Grant because I know you're kind of dogging on the special effects in this movie, and compared to Discovery, it's like nothing.
right, it's bad, but also, like, when I think of contemporary films to this, I'm like, well, Star Wars looked pretty great in comparison.
until Lucas went back and fixed it.
Well,
Well-
think about the old like the original Battlestar Galactica, right? If you've ever tried to go back and watch those sci-fis, it's brutal, right?
Right.
So
I think of like John Carpenter's like Dark Star or something
it's
like
just,
that, where I'm like,
Mhm.
okay,
I
you're
thought,
just messing around.
yeah, I thought here I don't want to say less is more, but they used it in a way that it wasn't distracting and it actually enhanced kind of what I was watching, and I enjoyed it. Like I didn't, especially to watch this almost 20 years later and go back and go, oh man, that is bad. Like I didn't feel that. I just
Yeah.
it was like just enough. So sci-fi effects that hold up, that's a win in my book.
I always had it in my mind though that Star Trek had this higher reverence for scientific accuracy, and sometimes I see some scenes in here that I'm like, did you guys not know back in the '80s like how things explode, or that a ship that gets hit isn't going to fall to its side like it's crashing because it's still there's no gravity in space. So, I don't know. It's just weird
But
things
there's
like
momentum.
I'm going down, but there is no down.
Well, it depends on who's behind the production. The guys doing this were not huge Star Trek fans. You get a lot of that like accurate science stuff.
I feel like I'm just
in
bitching about stuff a lot
in
here, guys.
TNG. Yeah. Oh, this is good. King says, "Good thing they didn't try a Kirk Khan fight in the movie. That would have just looked so bad at that point." Yeah, Kirk can barely beat his own little wimpy son. Any final thoughts about the movie, guys? Are you glad you watched it again?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I always have a good time, and I'm ready to mosey our way to my favorite Star Trek movie, which is The Voyage Home.
Clyde?
I'm glad that I got a chance to revisit this. Mike has said some really glowing things about this. I'm not quite that far, but I thought this was a good movie with strong acting. And if I to me, it's a lot to say it holds up pretty well for 20 years later. When we have like tech and CGI that can do so much, this was a pretty strong movie.
Grant, final thoughts?
I feel like it's a little bit walking on eggshells to critique in this particular venue this movie, which I recognize is very highly revered
Speak your mind,
among
Grant.
Say what you
Trekkies.
want.
I think it is very much of its time period,
Mhm.
and the '80s were the '80s. um,
By
I
the
don't
way,
know.
guys, this movie is almost 40 years old. We keep saying
That's
20
right.
years
said
later.
I keep saying that.
Yeah,
I'm thinking
it's
Like
really
40
old.
years
it's
old.
40 years old. Yeah.
I was born a few months after this movie came out.
Well, like I said, I think it's great. I think it's the first Star Trek production that really feels like it's an phrasing. I was just gonna say it feels like an adult movie.
Oh no! Don't say that.
It feels
Just all
mature.
that con chest
Yeah.
and awkward sweater vest.
I mean, those scenes with the bug going in the ear are considered X-rated, but this feels like a really mature film for me in terms of Star Trek, and I love the way that it mixes the fun action adventure, the revenge plot, and all the hamminess of Montalban with these really deep themes of death and rebirth and mortality and aging that I think just make it so much more complex. And even though this is a film that kind of the great climactic scene at the end where Spock dies gets undone in the next movie, it still sets a template for Star Trek that we see to this day that has made the franchise endure for so long. The movie before this was just such a slow, plodding mess with no real character interactions and no real human themes to grasp onto. But this one puts the character interactions and the deep themes that people can relate to front and center. And I think the best of the series, or the best of the franchise has done that ever since. So this movie sets a great template. It really helps save Star Trek, and I love it. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. We'll be back in a few weeks to do some more fun Trek content for you. We'll be doing pods on Star Trek 3 and 4, finishing out the Genesis trilogy over the next few weeks, and you can only find those at patreon.com/Star Trek Pod. And on the main feed, we'll be back in a few weeks talking Discovery with an overview of Michael Burnham's character arc and where we think she'll be in season 3.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
In
for
the
that.
future. Sorry, did I spoil
In the
that?
future.
I spoiled that, didn't I? That you said where she's gonna be, and I just jumped out there and said in the future.
Emotionally, Clyde.
technically.
Emotionally.
She will be in the future. If y'all enjoyed this episode, or if you enjoy all of our episodes, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a little note telling us why you enjoy the show. Maybe give us a shout out of who you're looking forward to seeing on the pod when we do our character arcs. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, 5 stars, Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find the show, so we really appreciate it.
We'd also appreciate you guys hitting us up over at patreon.com/Star Trek Pod and making a per episode pledge. Give us $1 or $2 per episode. And of course, this episode is the only one that's going out to the public. So if you want to hear our thoughts on movie number 3 and movie number 4, one of them has whales, as far as I
So many
understand.
whales.
And the other one, I think we're going to find a dead guy and bring him back to life with some Vulcan magic or something. So please go sign up at patreon.com/Star Trek Pod and become a supporter. Give us $2 an episode and also join us over on our special exclusive Slack channel.
Because we know Grant and I need more wigs.
And the best way for you to find out when we drop a new episode is to subscribe to the pod. So you can subscribe on Apple, on Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. We ask you, please subscribe to the podcast.
All right, Mariah, where can we find you online?
I am at Mariah Gossett. That's Mariah with a Y and a Gossett with 2 S's and 2 T's. And you can see some more fun pictures of this wig.
Grant Davis.
Baron Von Grant, right here. Go there.
Clyde Haynes.
Other side.
At
There you go.
Clyde Haynes. You can also find me at keyandclyde.com. That's KEI and Clyde.com.
All right, follow us on Twitter and Insta at Star Trek Pod. Find me on Twitter at Mike Moody. Guys, I feel young. Live long and prosper.
Bye.